Good evening, all, and welcome to another installment in our discussions. Hi, Sonia, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm good.
Yeah,
How's everyone out there?
it's been about a month since we had one of these last discussions. I know it seems like just 2 or so weeks ago, but it's been a whole month. We were busy, we were having fun. As I've heard people say lately, life was lifing. So that was what was happening to us. And I'm sure that all of you also, you were engaged in various activities in your personal and professional lives as well. So we have an exciting topic this evening. Now, Sonia, you were the one who was inspired by this topic. We are going to be talking about something that you have discovered is really a question that you get a lot. It's coming from younger professionals, it's coming from senior professionals. It really is an issue that a lot of people want to know more about, want to discuss, and would like some guidance on how to do it better. And it
Mhm.
is about letting them go, knowing when and how to fire an employee. Definitely an interesting topic. So,
Mhm.
what really jumped out for you that made you select this as our topic that we would cover this evening?
I think talking to people and not having them realize that when you're firing someone, you're ending the employment relationship with them, right? If you are if you're friends with them, you can end the employment relationship with a friend and still remain friends. So there's a process and a way to go about firing someone. And I don't think that a lot of people understand that. And when you look at the news, you see people modeling very worse ways to go about firing employees, ending employment relationships. And I think that for a lot of people coming into a relationship with a employee and that they recognize they have to fire them, first of all, there's a lot of avoidance. Second of all, they find it very stressful, and because they find it very stressful and they often avoid it, they make it an even worse experience for the employee they're going to fire as well as themselves. So I thought this would be a great topic to say to people: there is nothing wrong with ending an employment relationship with an employee as long as you go into understanding the right way to approach it and you do your due diligence, and you operate like a human being in a humane, compassionate, empathetic way, that firing some person could be great for your organization and it could be great for them as well as you. So that's where I thought, not enough people understand this. And so we need
Yes,
to educate them.
absolutely. And I totally agree with you. A lot of people see it because it's so uncomfortable a discussion to have. It's like we're not putting enough thought into how to do it well. So, what would you say maybe one of the biggest reasons that are driving people to feel so uncomfortable doing it? I mean, I can start because I know I've been in the situation where I have had to deal with letting an employee go, and we always feel, and I think particularly in the Caribbean, we always feel that we are somehow taking an unfair move when we are doing having to let an employee go. We even have that saying that you're taking bread out of somebody's mouth, that you are somehow making a move that is really in the worst possible position for that person. And so as a result, a lot of us come into it with the fear, the uncomfortable feeling of this is something bad that I'm doing. This is something that really I shouldn't even be considering. How did I get here? But we all know that really this needs to be seen as part of a performance development move for an employee. And so, as such, has to fit into the ongoing development conversation that we would have had. So that by the time we get to the situation where the employee is now being let go, it's not like they're, shocked and never saw it coming.
Yes, yes. We should start there. If an employee is
Yeah.
shocked and never saw it coming, then you're a bad leader.
Mm.
Let's just start right there, right? Because firing an employee and the decision, by the time you get to firing an employee, that's not where it starts. It starts long before that. And as a leader in an organization, you're trying to assemble a team. You know, there's that author that wrote Good to Great that he says, get the right people on the bus. So
Mm-hmm.
you're assembling a team, and your job is to figure out who doesn't belong there,
Yeah.
who is better someplace else, right? So, and once you're looking at some people, and you're saying, and it starts early for us as leaders, we can tell, you know,
Mm.
which is why you have a probationary period, right? For
Mm-hmm.
that reason, so you can tell, okay, this person, it's not aligning.
Mm.
And that's when you have to make the decision and distinguish between someone, has this person been set up to fail, versus this person does not have the skill sets requirements for this job.
Mm.
And at that moment is when most people start to avoid going into that critical analysis and start
Mm-hmm.
going in their feelings. Oh no, I'm feeling very uncomfortable. And so they either land in one or the two because they're not thinking it through. They either are continuously setting up the employee to fail, which is why they're scared of firing them because they know they're at fault, or they played a significant role in the failure of the failure of this employee, or this person is not skilled enough for the position and would be better off elsewhere. But I feel bad telling them that.
Yeah.
And all of this leads to those horrific scenarios you see play out where an employee is staring at some person they probably never met before. I mean, we saw the videos from HR telling them, we're firing you. And
Mm-hmm.
they don't have any legitimate logical reason for firing the employee. So the employer is feeling they're not being treated compassionately, humanely, fairly, which is what really starts, you know, viral thread, that viral trend where people started to film themselves being fired because they're like, this is not fair. And
Mm-hmm.
secondly, you are not telling me the truth. You are lying to me, and this is horrific. And I think this is where we start to say we need to be upskilled as leaders to know how and when to fire employees.
Yeah. And I actually want to take a step back into something that you've said because you talked about when we first encounter the employee, even during their probationary period, when we start to see that the person is not performing at the required level. And I want to say two things. And one, that really it is our responsibility as a leader to do that. So yes, there are some people who make more easily identify when a person is not performing, but we have to, as leaders, identify early on how an employee is motivated, how they learn, and how they are performing. Because part of our responsibility is to help them grow and develop in the role that they are fulfilling. And then the second thing I'll say about that statement is once we have identified what is missing for that person, if it is a lack of knowledge or lack of skill or a lack of interest, then we need to take action appropriately. And so it becomes part of our responsibility to then work with them as a leader. I think in a lot of instances, and we talk about this when we talk about effective delegation,
Mm-hmm.
there are times when an individual, and this is what I'm hearing you say when you talk about set up to fail, there is some instances, or there are some instances where individuals are not fully capable of doing the job, but they have the potential.
Yes.
And so, as a leader, we have to decide, are we going to invest in them to help them identify the potential and turn that potential into something real? Or are we going to keep throwing the job at them that they can't do? Do we
Yes.
ease them along and coach them to their performance level as required? Or do we say, you know what, you didn't bring me here to teach them this, and I'm not going to do it? I would
Yes.
argue, as a leader, it is our responsibility to help them to grow.
Absolutely. Yes, that's where we start. And you know what that requires? It requires that you pay attention to the uniqueness of human beings. And in
Yep.
a busy, um, goal driven world,
Mm-hmm.
leaders sabotage themselves when they don't do this.
Mm-hmm.
When they don't, there's always that inkling, they just know right away this employee, this new employee, which, first of all, I want to say bring back probationary periods, right? I love a probationary period. I have worked at an organization, and after 3 months, I sat down and say, this is not working. We are not well fit, and so I'm leaving. I'm firing myself from this job,
Mm.
right?
Yeah. Which
Because
is
this is
really what a probationary period is for. Not just for the
exactly
employer, but also for the employee.
employee. So
Yeah.
you want to bring back those probationary periods that says, and because a probationary period is where you really understand and work out how are we going to work here, you start to ask for what you need, because at the end of however long that probationary period is, typical one is 3 months, you're going to be evaluated on what you're delivered and how you've performed. And so you pay attention and just don't coast along. So within those first 3 months, a leader could basically tell whether this employee is going to work out or not. And
Mm.
often, as you say, it means paying attention to that unique individual and figuring out what do they need to thrive, and not just leave them out there to be. In all fairness, some leaders will say, "Listen, you have to come in and hit the ground running because we don't have time to, we don't have time to stop and invest in you by helping you along and training you along." That is different than if you have some person who comes and they will have great potential and you deliberately choose to invest in the people. But if you're not going to invest in them, you have to tell people that,
Mm-hmm.
right? And not leave them there hanging, not know what's going on. And the younger you are, I think today, in today's world, the more younger employees feel cast adrift at sea with no one to help them. And I
Mm-hmm.
can generally say that that's setting people up to fail, whereas leaders say it's, my goodness, they don't have any creativity or any potential. You have to direct them in everything. And I'm saying yes to that too, but life is about, especially if you want to work and work as a team, is about recognizing that you have to meet somewhere in the middle, and you can't just, younger adults aren't going to be able to hit the ground running. So when you're seeing
Mm.
that they're not exactly performing, it is your job as a leader to determine, do they have the skill set? Do they have potential? Have I given them everything they need to succeed in this process, or am I setting them up to fail? And if, for most people, you land in, I don't think I'm giving them everything they need for this unique individual, then it requires that you do the thing that most people try to avoid, which is you have performance development conversations with people where you give them performance feedback regularly, consistently, to help them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times people don't know how to do that. And that is why you feel, oh, it's so difficult to fire people,
Mm-hmm.
because you don't know how to tell them they're not performing. You can see
Yeah.
it clearly. You can see it clearly that they don't have any enthusiasm, that they're supposed to start at 8, they show up at 9, they're leaving at 3.
Yeah.
You know that they're not giving the enthusiasm that is needed, and you as a leader will observe that, judge them for it, rather than giving them the performance of feedback that says, hey,
Mm-hmm.
in this culture, on my team, this is how we do, this is the expectation I have of you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which I think brings us to talk a little bit then about performance management and how a leader should be undertaking that. Because as you said, there is the need for the conversation, there is the need for the feedback, the need to let the person know that they're not doing well. And a lot of people only see it as a difficult conversation, and so they avoid it.
Mm.
Instead, if they could put it in the context of performance management, which means you
Mm.
don't just wait for the performance appraisal at the end of the year or every quarter or whenever that formal document must be submitted. But if you see a person doing a thing wrong today, that you have a conversation with them today and offer them feedback on how they could do it better, then you begin to see it not so much as a chore, and it's not so heavy. Now, I often get conversations from supervisors and managers where they ask questions like, But what if you are trying to do that and the person doesn't want to listen? And that's when I say to them, that old saying, you have to lead a horse. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And I think every manager has to be willing to give it their all, try their best. And when they have tried the best to help the person develop, then accept, okay, fine, I've done everything I can, and this person is not willing to take this step. But that cannot be your first response. If because there are many people who sometimes don't take it when you give the first advice at first, but if you push a little bit more, they take it, and then years later they talk about how this manager helped them.
Listen, I about to say the person don't listen, but your feedback was so subtle and so ambiguous and so general that people don't know what you're talking about. All they're hearing that you're judging them to be wrong. You're judging them not to be good enough, but you're not giving them any useful, actionable data that they can utilize to improve their performance. So when people say to me, well, they don't listen. Well, first of all, how do you mean they're not listening? You're the one with the power to determine whether they're doing a good job or not. People naturally listen and want to know what leaders with power to impact their job, their livelihood, their income. People want to know what you want from them so they can give it to you. So if they're not listening, it's because you are not clear.
Okay. Now, let me just step in to say that's not always the case, because remember, in every instance, there are individuals who are the exception to the rule.
Wow.
So, in every instance, there may be one or two who really do not want to put up the effort, but that is never
Yes,
the majority. And
exactly.
so, the
That's where I want to
second
go.
the second part, which is what I was going to go on to say, is that sometimes what it takes is for you to be clear about what the consequences of not making the change are. And that is where I think in a lot of organizations, they're not doing a good job of that. Because many leaders, many supervisors, many managers will say things like, well, we don't fire anybody here, or we can't fire people depending on the type of organization it is. Firing is not
Oh,
an option. And so they don't feel that they have any way of disciplining the person or outlining to them what the consequences are and then enforcing it. And I repeatedly say to them, many times the reason why you cannot enforce the discipline that goes along or the consequence is because you have not done a good job of documenting.
wow.
So if you have not been documenting the problem, you cannot then turn up at HR's door and say, well, I need to do this to this person. And HR goes, what? But every time you've sent me a performance appraisal in the last 2 years, it said they
It
were a
was
good
brilliant.
employee. So what are you talking about? And that's another important thing that we have to do as leaders, as managers. Don't just rely on HR to be responsible for discipline, handing out discipline. Don't just rely on HR for keeping records. You as managers and as supervisors need to document when things happen. Otherwise, you cannot take action as required because you don't have a leg to stand on. You can't be
Yes.
specific. You can't remember the date. You can't remember the exact activity. And if you say the person always, then the employee goes, no, that's not true.
Well, that is my thing that when you tell me they're not listening, then you are not clear. And in order to be clear, you need to document it, which I always think that you should, because I document it in the moment, even if it's for yourself, because you don't always remember, right? And so you have
You
to,
assume that you never remember. Don't say that you don't always. Let's assume
right?
we never remember and write it down.
You have to document it, and that's where those you always, because they're dealing with a feeling and not facts,
Mm.
right? So I'm saying the vast majority, if you're clear, which is why you're paying attention to the uniqueness of the individual, so you will know how they retain information, so you can make it clear and you can be seen as a source of support to the person. If someone isn't performing to the standard, or they're not given the deliverables that they're supposed to give, then you as a leader coming in to say, hey, you are supposed to deliver X, but it's not to the standard that we require. And here is the standard, explicit standard, not made up in my head and how I feel, but explicit. Do you understand the standard? Okay. If you don't understand the standard, we will figure out how you can understand it, because we can't ask people to meet a standard they don't understand, that they don't know. And so that's the response of that. And that's where I say you're either setting an employee up to fail, or the employee does not have the skill sets that are needed. Those are the two things that you should be dealing with before you fire some person. And so you start with, you've been setting this employee up to fail because you haven't had the time to give them the work that's needed. And then if that is so, and you find yourself having a lot of employees who are coming in and unprepared, then your recruiting strategy is at fault. You're not recruiting the people that you need. So go to your recruiting strategy and your recruiting process and deal with it then. But until then, you now have to put in the work to say to the employee, here's the standard, here's the explicit, because, to be explicit, to be clear is to be kind. I think it's Brené Brown that says that. And then you are then able to hold them to that standard. That's where the discipline is coming from. But if the employee doesn't know, and it's some, they look around and see another employee doing exactly what they're doing, but you are not over them, they're telling them that they need to meet this standard, of course they're going to ignore you. So I don't necessarily drink the bush tea of leaders that tell me people don't listen, because I'm like, yeah, those are very, very few people, who are living in an alternate world. And we haven't, you and I, Marjorie, have encountered those people, and those are rare. They are there. And that's when you go straight to the firing, securing the knowledge that you are not sending up this person to fail. This person just does not have the skill set, the outlook, or the attitude required for success in their job. As I like to say, you are a duck up in the air with eagles, and you need water. Set them free so they can go to find water. And that should be a nice process where you can talk to the person and say, we're severing this employment relationship, but you're a wonderful person. This is just not, at this point in time, this is not the environment for you. It's not the environment for us. And so we're severing it. However, go free knowing that you will thrive and you will succeed someplace else.
Okay. So I think thus far we have established, or we've been talking about the when to fire, because we've been talking really about the stages that should happen before you even get to the point that you're considering firing. It really is up to the leader. It is the leader's responsibility to make sure that they fully understand their employees, that they fully understand and see this person as a unique individual with a unique collection of skills and capabilities, and do not immediately write this person off. It is the leader's responsibility as well to take the actions to help this person grow and develop. So to commit to that performance management process. And that includes giving feedback. It includes keeping accurate records of performance issues, so that if you are going to then have to ensure that a person meets the consequences of not meeting standards, then you have specific data that you can reference. It is also important that you make sure your standards for performance are clear, because there's a lot of research that, and I can't remember the numbers now, but remember Gallup is always doing the research that shows a lot of employees do not fully understand what is expected of them. So it means that there are a lot of employees out there that don't fully understand the standards that they're expected to meet. So it's up to the leader to make sure that those are clear.
And that you're listening to the employee. That's the only other thing I would say, that you listen to the employee, because the employee can tell you.
Talk a little bit more about that.
Well, generally, you sit before an employee, and you, Marjorie, and I, you and I have sat before an employee where we say, this is our lens. This is what we're seeing. And when you listen to the employee, they're experiencing and saying a completely different thing. Marjorie, I have come to you with an employee to say, we're in a bad marriage. I'm in your office saying, we are in a bad marriage and we need a mediator. We need a marriage counselor, because we are seeing the situation completely different. And so we need a third party, an independent third party, to really talk us through the situation and get to that win-win scenario, because you think you're a leader, you know what's going on, but you don't. So you have to create the environment where the employee can tell you the truth, right? So that's the only thing I will add, because it's a unique individual they may need, so for example, an employee may have ADHD and you're constantly sending them long detailed emails that they may say, hey, I prefer, or you may be requiring them to send you long detailed emails, and they may prefer to just send you a voice note, you know? and, and so it's really important that you listen to the employee. So we're not saying to you as the leader, take on the burden yet again of trying to solve the problem, but in collaboration with the employee, in making things explicit, then the employee um, is best positioned to tell you, okay, if you want X, Y, and Z, here's what I need. Can the organization give me that? And therefore, you can then negotiate that, or you can say, actually, no, the organization cannot give you that. And then you can mutually agree that this is not the organization for me, for the employee, and you can, move them on. So that's the only other thing I would add.
Right. Okay. And that's good. So once we have those things in place and we are then convinced or we are comfortable that we have an understanding of the employee and we are doing what is necessary in order to help them understand what they should be doing. We are giving them feedback to help them stay on track. We are asking them and getting their input to make it a collaborative learning journey. Once we've been able to do all of those things, we are then in a position to say, well, I have done all that I can. This definitely, as you say, I like that. And I do remember when you used to say that about an employee. We are in a bad marriage here. And so we need to consider some other options.
Mm-hmm.
And so then after you've gone through that process and as a manager or leader, you recognize then that you're going to have to part ways with this employee. The firing is going to have to happen. The person cannot stay into the organization. This is where then it still is an emotional process. It still is a difficult conversation, but it is a conversation that needs to take place. So I think we can now maybe identify some steps that we would suggest individuals take into consideration when they get to that point where they have to sit down and have that termination discussion with the
Yes,
employee.
yes, because it won't be a surprise to the employee at this point,
No,
because you would have had
no.
several conversations about the performance, and it would be that they're not meeting the explicitly agreed performance standards or outcomes
Mm-hmm.
that you have set. And so the employee not meeting those things will have some sort of sinking inkling that this firing is coming. And
Yeah.
not because they are incompetent, but at this stage and for this particular job, you are not the best fit for it. So we
Yeah.
have to sever the relationship. And I think this is where you sit with your HR to understand, to show the documentation. Obviously, you would be keeping them up to date at some point, but you'll talk to HR about it because HR is uniquely qualified to let you know what are the legal
Mm-hmm.
procedures, what is the process of the organization, what you need to go through. And you would have documentation and you will have the facts upon which you are making this decision. And they
Mm-hmm.
will be best advised to, okay, again, I always say you go to somebody else because they may need a mediation. So HR will know why this is happening, and HR will help you create a document that you can, when you have so that when you go to the firing conversation, you
Mm-hmm.
will be able to hand it to them in terms of, what the resources to help them as they leave and what are the steps to take in terms of leaving. So you go into that actual firing conversation prepared. And I'll stop here to see if you had any other preparation for the firing conversation.
Yeah, I agree with you completely that it is important to prepare, and I really would draw on the context that maybe a lot of people in Barbados know. It's not necessarily the same in every territory, but it is important for you to identify, as you said, what are the legal procedures that you must follow, because we do have a Labor Act here in Barbados that governs the steps that you need to take in order to even get to the point that you can consider firing an employee. And you're right that HR is uniquely qualified, uniquely aware of those things. And if you are in an organization that does not have an HR person, or you are an entrepreneur and you find yourself in this situation, you can always reach out to the Employers Confederation, because they're always giving advice and guidance on this. But there are specific steps that you must take, and you must have at least two instances where you have provided an individual with discipline or warning letters before you can get to a stage that you are going to move on from them. So, and you of course have to show that you've taken steps to try to help the person improve. So it's
Mhm.
never a situation that you can just decide, well, you know what, this isn't working out, you're out of here.
Yeah. Well, I'm in the
In the US,
USA where
it
you have
doesn't
where and
have
I'm
that same act. It doesn't have an
well,
act like that.
yeah, I'm in an at will state, which means that you can fire
Hmm.
someone for no reason.
Right,
However, I'm also in a litigious society.
right.
So even though you can fire people, well, obviously there are certain situations are protected. You can't fire some person based on their race, their gender. You can't have like constructive dismissal where you
Hmm.
created an environment where it's so uncomfortable for the employee that they have no choice but to quit
To
your,
leave.
to leave. There's
Mm,
some countries where that happens. I think I was
mm,
reading the other day that in Japan they will literally just not give you any work to do.
mm,
So, well, I don't know how true this is,
mm,
and so you'll just sit there with nothing to do, but you still have to look like you're employed, and so it's so uncomfortable that you will leave. That can't happen in this at will stuff because someone will sue you, and so that's
mm,
why you're bringing in. And here, if you don't have an HR, as you say. You have employees, then you need to. There's so many HR consultants that you can hire to and that can advise you because you don't want to be sued, not necessarily because you've done anything wrong, but because people have time on their hands to sue you.
yeah.
you
And
know.
it's the same. And it's the same here. While it's not simply a case of a very litigious society, but it
Hmm.
is a situation that the Labor Act allows the option of you taking it to court, and
Yeah,
it can go all the way to the tribunal. Well, the tribunal
exactly.
is seen as court.
Yes.
And so it can then get escalated to a higher level. So you're absolutely right. There are those options out there. So as part of your preparation, make sure that you're following the law, you're taking the steps that are necessary. You have to ensure it's not a surprise for the employee. You can't just pick a decide that I need to get rid of this person. They're just, I don't like how they're performing. They need to get out of here. It has to follow procedures. So the same obtains in many territories.
Yeah, so wherever you are in the
Mhm.
world, HR is your good bet to give you advice. And an organization would have a procedure as to what, as you say, following the labor laws, what can
Mhm.
and cannot be done. However, this is all how should I say, perfunctory, or because you would have done the work to say to yourself and almost to the employee that we've given you every opportunity to succeed. This just
Mhm.
isn't the job for you, right? And it's not that you're an awful employee, but this just isn't the job for you, or you've made such a mistake or caused such damage that this really right now is not the job for you, and that's where you when you approach it from the mindset that it's not that you're taking away the livelihood of some person, but you have a responsibility for the organization to ensure that you have functioning, working team members that can deliver the role. From that lens, then you can see it's not about it. There, yes, your job as a leader is to identify who doesn't belong here in
Mm.
terms of being able to move forward. Not because they're a bad person, but because they don't have the skill set. Once you have that mindset and you're not looking at the person in a very destructive conflict way, but as in we tried our best, we're really working hard. I know you see this as a failure, but it is not. I'm here
Mhm.
trying to help you. Then you can follow up the legal way, and then you can have that conversation and prepare for it. And then we
Okay.
could talk about how do you carry out the conversation.
Absolutely. And so that's a good point for me to jump in to say anytime you're doing any kind of termination conversation, it needs to be done in a respectful manner. So, as you've said, we've seen some of the videos out there, and we've seen individuals who are fired in a way that, while it's not disrespectful in terms of harsh
It's callous.
language, but yeah, it is disrespectful of them as human beings. It represents, as you say, a callous approach to caring about their feeling,
Mhm.
caring about how they should be treated. It's almost like, well, you know what, we're done with you. You can't meet our needs. We don't need you anymore. Get out of here. That's
And
not what they say, but that is what comes across.
And let me say, as a leader, that if you are incapable and unable to hire some person, then you should not be a leader. You should not be a people leader.
Hmm.
If you're going to just pitch it off to the HR person that this person, that the person, the employee does not know, then you do not deserve to be a people leader. Be a technical leader, be an expert, a specialist. Do not be a people leader,
Yeah.
because you're right. You have to you fire people in a human with an acknowledgement of their humanity, and you allow people to keep their dignity, right? Because a firing conversation is not a performance discussion. Let me just be clear. All the talking and the conversation and the conversating, if that's a word, has already occurred. This is now a informing the employee that while they're a valuable human being and they make a lot of positive contributions, this is not the environment for them.
Yeah.
And some people take that sad, as of course it could be sad, some may be angry, of course it can be angry, but you are to retain you're the one who de-escalates and keep it to the main point, which is we have decided to terminate the employment relationship. And I say this is a situation where you have to allow people to keep their dignity in that manner, which means prioritize them, give them a lot of grace. But this discussion is to say we're parting ways.
Hmm.
That's it. And some of it can go for the long discussion, and some, depending on how the person is responding, it's a very short conversation.
Yeah.
But you as a
Yeah.
leader have to do it. I should do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, as you were saying that, I'm actually remembering some instances in the past. I remember once I had an employee who he wanted to become a musician, a young guy working in our organization, but he wanted to become a musician. And so he took his holiday and went off to another island to work on writing songs. And then it took longer than he expected. And so he asked us for an extended and unpaid leave for him to stay there and write the songs. And then when he came back, all of his focus was on whether they were going to take his music, how it was going to go forward. And
Hmm.
eventually we got to the point where we had the performance discussion. And as part of the performance discussion, this wasn't even a firing conversation. This was, is this really something that you want to do moving forward?
Hmm.
And when it came to the point that it wasn't something he wanted to do moving forward, then we mutually agreed that it was better for us to go our separate ways.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the
And
second one that popped into mind for me was when you said this short conversation. We had an IT guy once who, as we walked in to have HR and I were having the discussion, he didn't report to me. He reported to HR, but she'd asked me to go with her. The HR executive, he reported to her because she did HR and admin. And in that conversation, as she was having it with him, he went, I know, I saw this coming. He said, based on the conversations we've been having lately, I saw this coming. And
that's a perfect firing right there.
he had a little folder with him. We talked about how we were going to give him time to pack up. And he said, no, that's not necessary. He said, I've already packed up my desk. I've already, because I knew that this was coming. And he wasn't angry. He wasn't upset. Of course, he was sad because it means it didn't work out. We felt badly because we were in a situation we had to let someone go. But it was an easy conversation because in his head, he understood it was coming. It wasn't a surprise and it wasn't a shock. And we moved on from it. And as you say, that is the perfect conversation. It's not always possible, but it is up
Hmm.
to us as leaders to try to make it as comfortable for the person, and also to be not just caught up in our own emotions, that we can have sympathy, have interest, have care for the other person sitting across the
Yes,
table.
because you are, especially you as a leader, saying to the person, rem- if you're being fired, you always feel, okay, then there's something wrong with me. And
Mm-hmm.
we're old enough and experienced enough to know that no, that's not the case. There are some perfectly great people that you put them in one job, this is really fair, but you put them in another job and they're spectacular, right? There's not the
Yeah.
job for them. And so that's the emphasis that you're putting on people, and they don't always want to hear it, but you will say to them, this will be a good move for you. I know that people don't like uncertainty, and that's the key thing of being
Mm-hmm.
fired. First of all, you feel judged that you're left wanting. So you have to let people know, yeah, it wasn't a good fit here for you.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, your future is bright because you are a good person, unless they're not. And then it's like, well, you and I are not parting, but I'm sure you will fit someplace else. I'm not going to
Mm-hmm.
speculate on how bright your future is because don't call me for a recommendation, right?
Yeah.
You leave that unsaid. And so that's the way it's good. You're not in that firing conversation, you're not rehashing issues because those have already been explored, those have been communicated. You are basically saying, here's how we're going to part ways, here's how it's going to happen, and here's a document that you have that we're giving you that contains all the details. If you need more information, then send us an email
Mm-hmm.
afterwards. Feel free to write an email afterwards. And that's where, if it's and of course, we're sticking a pin here to say that's if you're having most firings can go that way. We can talk about, say, for example, you are having a reorganization in an organization,
Mm.
as we have consulted and been on many of those. And with a reorganization, people will lose their jobs, but you don't know who. How does the firing process work then? But let's
Mm-hmm.
finish this part on if you're individually firing some person who no longer who doesn't have the
Whose
skill set.
performance, yeah, performance isn't meeting what is expected.
Yes, and it could be a very good process so that by the time you get to the firing, it's just like, it's either getting the employee to realize, do you really love this job? And
Mm.
it's like, no, but I need to earn some money. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, you can earn money and still do something you like.
Yeah,
We are not
yeah.
here as a temporary stopgap until you find that. You don't get to languish here
Mm.
waiting for until you find something you like. You're
Mm-hmm.
entitled to that, but this is not a place. We are not a Starbucks. We are not we're not a coffee shop that you hang out in. This is an organization that requires everyone to be on board, everyone to be enthused, everyone to have a good attitude here. And so if you are here without either of those, and it doesn't translate into excellent performance and meeting our standards, then we can part ways, right?
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The third thing I would say is, and for me, it was a mindset shift that I had to make. The
Mm-hmm.
the and I think you mentioned it earlier. When you're the person sitting across the table having the conversation and you find it difficult and uncomfortable, for me, I had to see it as part of letting this person go to go find their bliss. And
Mm-hmm.
those were the words that I had to tell myself because I've had some very nice people that I've worked with, and they were very kind and they were very caring, but they just were not very capable of doing that particular
That
job. But they
exactly.
were excellent at other things. And so those are the people that are most difficult for you to let go because you feel like they're so sweet. How could I do this to them? And so I had to get to the point where I say to myself, even as I'm about to sit down, I said, okay, now remember, you are letting this person go to go find their bliss. And I will tell you, I have never met any of them afterwards who were not in some job that they were loving it, they were excellent at it, and they had grown and thrived every single time. So
Yes.
I think when you walk into the conversation with the understanding, I said, it's not that you aren't good at doing things, but is this particular role
This
I
particular
do
role
not
that
think
you are
is
not.
right for you. And I will often say to them what I know they're good at. There was one young guy who had worked with us, and oh, he was terrible at his job. He was so terrible at the job, but he was the nicest guy and he was great at being a host. And anytime we had an event and he would jump up and he'd go do everything for this person and he'd go run off and do the other thing. And he did it with a wonderful expression and everybody loved interacting with him. And he had done part-time work as a host at events before. And so I told him, I think this is something you should pursue. He didn't pursue that right away, but he took that as an option later on, and eventually he's parlayed that into what he's doing now. So there are people out there who, and we have to know this as leaders. If you keep a person, I think it's Einstein that they say that if you try to get a fish to climb a tree,
Mm,
if you're expecting a fish to climb a tree, then of course it's going to fail at it. But if, of course, you put it out there to swim in the water, it's going to be excellent at it.
exactly.
And so, as leaders, we have to look at people and see maybe I'm asking this fish to climb a tree. And it's not that this isn't a good fish, but it just isn't made for climbing trees.
Yeah. And I think one of the key things we know for human nature as coaches as well is that people don't make those positive transformative changes unless they're forced to. In other words, people will sit in a job that they're not enjoying, that makes them miserable every day. They're longing to like start their own business or do something else. And they will only do that when they get fired.
Mm-hmm.
They will not, because of the uncertainty. And
Yeah.
so people are scared of uncertainty, so they will sit in jobs that they're not good at.
Mm-hmm.
And you are entertaining it when in reality that's part of your role as a as a leader to help
Mm-hmm.
those people move and move along. And that is why I think in those sort of conversations, affirming conversations, we don't talk about family, we don't talk about personal issues, we do not talk about, because we treat people humanely, we treat people as human beings, we give them empathy, we let them keep their dignity, but we are not responsible for them as human beings. That's what they're
Mm-hmm.
adults. They can take care of their situation. So someone that says, oh, but I need this job. Well, if you needed this job, then you should have put some more effort and act like you needed it. That's that's what you need to do. Act like you need it. Act and understand that you know that your performance is being judged by someone else. And so pay attention to what that person requires. I do not take on the emotional blackmail at the end of, oh, you're putting me out, or no, because you are an adult and you have the responsibility as an adult to act according not to how you feel, but what the circumstances of your life dictates. And of course, some people are fired for no other reason than, like when you look at those big tech companies who overhire in one period and then right size in another period and just
Mm-hmm.
fire. And basically, it's just tossing out, and whoever they touch gets fired. So there's no logical reason why they're being fired. They're just being fired because the company made a business decision to overhire at one point and then retract at another. And this is where I think for a lot of young people, they're now realizing that as adults, you have to understand that when you're accepting that big position and that wonderful position at one of those big companies, it comes with some risks, and it's up to you to understand the risks and the downside and to prepare for it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not easy out there. Not that I am condoning the way they go about it. We know that some companies go about it very well. They explain to employees, this is a business decision. It really isn't an impact on you. Here is an extremely beneficial settlement to help you over this thing. Here is a whole bunch of resources in which you can utilize to get another job. And, they do that very well so that the employee, while sad, feels taken care of, feels
Okay.
like you did this right, as opposed to
Mm-hmm.
the others is just kick people out the door. That you wake up one morning and you only know you're fired when you try to log in. That is a horrible
Yes.
way
Yes,
to
we've
fire
heard.
some person.
Yes, we've heard stories about that. you know,
Horrible.
yeah, you go to log in when you get to work, or
And
yeah, as you
those
say, remotely,
companies
and you can't
that
get
do
in.
that
Yeah.
should know better. And I understand, like, when you're having you know, when you're dealing with sensitive situations at a company, and an employee, you can read the writing on the wall. Well, first of all, let me just say, excellent employees in those circumstances are always the first to leave. They see the writing on the wall, but as a great employee, and I include myself in this, you can read the writing on the wall and you know that you are valuable. You exit. You don't wait for someone to tell you you're gone. You look around, get your network, and you go. And which is why I always say to organizations when they're going through significant changes that you have to have a communication for them. If not, all your top talent is going to go. And all you're going to be left with is the people who have nowhere else to go. And that is not how you want your organization to do. So, right. But I do understand the difficulty of, you don't want, some people may, while they're in the system, may do tremendous damage in retaliation for the fact that they think they're being done. So companies have to manage, when do I tell an employee that they're going? And those are the ones where you are locked out of the system, or in the days before COVID, you're walked into a room, they've already packed your stuff there, and then they tell you that you have been fired. So those are some situations, but I think that those are not good situations, and there are better ways that those large organizations with tremendous resources, which is why I always cite out them, because I think you have a lot of money, and therefore you have a lot of resources that you can dedicate as to how we maintain confidentiality and security of our intellectual property, and still treat people humanely in letting them go. And yeah, so that's how I feel about those complex and nuanced situations.
Okay, so we have agreed that when you are actually in the room and you need to have, or when you've come to the point where your next step is to have the termination discussion, that you want to, one, make sure that you are well prepared, make sure that you are adhering to whatever labor laws or employer procedures exist for terminating the services of an employee.
Mm-hmm.
Two, you want to make it a comfortable conversation. You want to ensure that you are treating the person who is being let go in a humane manner, that you are not having a callous and non caring discussion. And as we said, because you would have done all of the work beforehand to help the person, well, to try to help the person develop as much as possible, it's not a surprise to them. And so you want to ensure then that that conversation goes in a comfortable and calm way. You want to manage your emotions, and you want to get to the point where in your mind you have that mindset that this is part of the employee's journey, and you are freeing that person to go off and find their bliss, or the place where they can succeed and really thrive and do an excellent job consistently. And
Or a
so
place where
those
they
are
could
the,
take their misery away from you.
okay.
Because not all employees are the best, wonderful ones. So we don't want to be like all Pollyanna up in here. We do know that sometimes you get some very bad employees, but the majority, for the vast majority, yes, you
Yeah.
do want to reaffirm to them, you are a valuable, great person. This is just not the place for you.
Yeah. And I think that's really where our conversation has to be when we're having those conversations. It is that this is not the place for you. This is not the
Yes.
best place for you to be. All right. So I think those are our suggestions on how to fire an employee. Now, you did mention that there are times when organizations are reorganizing. And so it's not a matter of the employee's performance, but it really is that you've come to a situation where things are changing. It could be economic downsizing, it could be
Mm-hmm.
that you're merging with another entity, it could be that you're going to be closing some branches or something like that, and you're going to make some posts redundant because you're moving into different ways of working.
Mm-hmm.
Any of those things can happen, and we can
Yes.
wind up in situations where then employees are, it has little to do with your performance, and it has a lot more to do with the economic realities, the environmental realities, the head office decisions, the
Mm-hmm.
whatever, whatever, whatever. and it sometimes it's just a numbers game. And
Yes.
those conversations then can be really challenging for people who have to do it because that's just as painful.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. But I am saying that those organizations have a lot of resources that they can dedicate to make this process much better. They just don't
Some
care.
of those organizations.
I believe all of them,
Okay.
quite frankly.
Well, I'm going to go that it can't be all of them because you can have an entrepreneur that has to downsize.
Oh no, I don't mean an entrepreneur. I mean the big organizations who
Okay.
engage. An
I
entrepreneur will really engaging, but it will be like that.
I
Will have a large team that they're firing. you
Okay.
know.
I am speaking of an organization of any size, and it can be difficult for the person who's having it. And so, a lot of the conversation or a lot of the decision making then is around, well, how do I tell these employees? When do I tell these employees? And so, you often will find, because I'm thinking of an organization that I know of that had like less than 30 people, and the decision was taken in for economic realities that they had to cut the staff in half.
Hmm.
And so the decision was taken at executive level, and the employees were informed, let's say at the beginning of the week, and they had a few days to wrap everything up, to hand it over, to then deal with the individuals who it's going to be left with, to make sure that they had clear instructions and so on. So
Hmm.
it can be done in a way where people know it's coming and you trust these people.
Yeah.
So you're treating them with the respect that it's not that you have to kind of hide the fact and wait till Friday evening at 4 o'clock, and I tell everybody, all right, well, some of y'all will be here next week and some won't. Here's your
Yes.
here's your
Yeah.
envelope, so you know where you fall.
Right. Yes. I think those
Because
organizations, I'm talking about the big organizations that do large and mass layoffs, because I think I agree with you. Those people can have a good discussion. It's for economic reasons. An entrepreneur would usually reduce their team and have and I may have been working with, say, for example, a consultant who would say, like business has slowed down. Oh, you don't need to go any further. You understand, call
right,
me again when business pick up, or we can talk to each other. And again, as long as you're not lying to people, people can tell when you're
which
lying
is
to them.
which is what I think is the key point there. So it is important that you don't lie to the person, and that you don't try to act so shady just because you don't want to let them know the full picture right away.
Exactly.
Because I've had examples of employees who have felt um, mistreated because their organization didn't tell them that they were going to be laying off people, and they just went and got a loan, or they just
Mm.
went and got a mortgage, or they just bought a
Mm.
house or something like maybe 2 months ago, and now the organization's in financial trouble. So
Mm.
while a smaller business, you may not want to tell people that this is where you are, if you see that they are coming to you, let's say, and they want to do that, because in a lot of instances you get some kind of endorsement, warranty, job letter, something from your
Mm.
employer. And so we have to get to the stage where employees, so leaders and their employees, you have to see it that we're in this together.
Mm.
And it's not an easy decision how much you will share, but it really becomes, because we're in it together, you can't let me go off and put my life on the line in January, and then you lay me off in March and I made a commitment for 30 years,
Yes.
because then
Mm.
I feel like you've used me in an unjust manner.
And it's not use me in an unjust manner, but you didn't help me, because
That's
normally,
what I meant.
yeah, organizations would say, well, legally we can't tell you anything.
Mm,
And as a leader, we always say, if you come and tell me as a leader, people are scared. I'd be like, you are scared because
mm,
your people are looking to you. So
mm.
let's deal with your concerns. Don't tell me about your people. Let me talk to you. And sometimes what leaders will say is, you sit at an executive level, but you're not allowed to talk to employees to say,
About
listen,
certain
we
things.
just had a meeting where we discussed that we don't know how to pay y'all next month. know, that could be the conversation. But I agree with you that you don't outright flagrantly disrespect the privacy and your responsibilities as a leader, but you can You can make comments to your leadership team and say, this is a
Yeah.
difficult situation going on globally. This is a time that we have to be prepared as we go up. So, jokingly, don't go and sign no documents right now you can find ways in which to be caring, which is why I think
Absolutely.
you're trying to say to be caring to individuals. Which is why I say large organizations have the responsibility because they have the money to model good ways of doing it.
Yeah.
And when they take the time to do it so poorly, it is extremely disappointing and it's not good enough. You're too big of an organization for people to be logging on and trying to call other people's phones to say, wait, I couldn't get on this morning. What do you think is happening? And for somebody else to be telling you, I just watched the news and they're firing people, so it might be
Mm.
you.
Yeah.
No.
All right. Well, I
Yeah.
think we had a very good discussion today
Yeah.
as we wrap up. We've talked about ways that you can know when you should be firing and what should happen before you even get to the point where you're thinking about that. And we've talked also about ways to do it. And the key thing is to do it with respect, do it humanely, and recognize that it is part of an ongoing journey and it is not just a, surprise.
Yeah. If you do it right, people have fired themselves and you're just informing them. you know,
Oh,
if you
that's a
do it
nice way
right,
of looking
yes.
at it.
And as a
Yeah.
person who have fired myself from companies and said, you know what, this is not working, I'm wholeheartedly agree. Your career is 100% owned by you, and it's employer enabled. And so leaders do not take on that burden that says that firing has to be the worst experience or something to avoid.
All right. Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us for our April discussion. We were talking about letting them go, knowing when and how to fire an employee. Please join us for our next discussion, which should be coming in sometime the next 4 weeks or so.
Yeah,
Where
monthly.
we will have another topic that we know you as leaders will find useful in your ongoing journey and development. So take care and have a good week.
Yeah.
Bye.